So, William Stevens trying to take away all of our meat? Why? Crazy old white guy? Well, that might be initially what some people think, but when you kind of get into his arguments, he kind of makes a few good points. And yes, this is my microphone. I put a sock on it to kind of dampen all the background audio. So, what are his five big main? Yeah, he's got his five big main arguments against eating meat. And he kind of comes at it from this approach of if a virtuous person or a person who considers themselves moral or virtuous were to come by and see his five different arguments, would they walk away feeling the same about eating meat? And would they still be a virtuous or good person because of it? I think, after going through all the different ones, it requires a certain person or a certain person in a privileged position to kind of look at some of these arguments. Like, I don't feel like it would be fair to criticize some goat farmer in southern Sudan for eating meat or farming animals because that's all they really have. That's the best option available to them. I feel like this works if you are looking at a person who is in a privileged enough position to where they don't need to eat meat to survive, but they're eating it anyway just because it's a comfort thing or it tastes good, or if there's no some sort of external force keeping a person from not eating meat. I feel like these arguments would work very well against them, but you have to be in a somewhat privileged position to kind of be argued into not eating meat. It requires a certain starting point for these arguments to feel fair, I feel. So his first kind of big argument is it okay for us to eat meat when there's people around the world who go hungry every night, and there's thousands of people each day, or I'm not sure if it's thousands, there's about 150,000 people die each day. I'd say a percentage of those people definitely die due to lack of food, but there's millions of people across the planet that don't have access to good food security. So is it okay for us to waste food, grains, corn such as that, and feeding animals when there's these people all around the world who go hungry every day? Could someone kind of look at that argument like, yeah, we can waste food on feeding animals while there's people that can't even eat every day? As a virtuous person, personally, or I'm looking through this as a lens as a very virtuous person. As a virtuous person might think, that doesn't feel too good to have people starving, while in the US we are wasting food and feeding animals. But if we were to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit, so what happens if we just stop feeding animals? Just let the ones we have left die out? Meat will only go to the rich people as it becomes less and less common. And then there's the problem of distribution. It's not like all these people that don't have access to food, they're all in one area. They're all over the planet. And then a lot of them are in pretty remote areas. So how would we go about getting the excess food to these areas in an efficient way that doesn't put more strain, I guess, on the environment? I feel like it would be pretty hard to do that in such a way that there's no real downside. And yeah, so overall, I feel like this argument is okay. Definitely the idea of wasting food on feeding animals while there are people that go hungry, that is a definite hard pill to swallow. But then if we kind of switch our approach it becomes a bit of a logistical problem of how we would be able to get the food to people in these places in a way that the food doesn't go bad or that it's not pumped full of preservatives. But also, if they are starving, they probably aren't going to be too picky if the food has preservatives in it. So, yeah, this one, I feel like it's a good kind of starting to think about it a little bit. Do I want to be wasting food while others can't eat? Another argument is the environmental harm aspect. So when we think about our big factory farms, especially cows, they release a lot of methane. And that methane is very harmful to our atmosphere. So when we think about greenhouse gases and such, cows are a large contributor to that. They also produce a lot of excrement, and that has to be dealt with somehow. So there's usually these gross, large ponds of cow shit, and blood. And that's not very environmentally too great. And it takes a lot of water to raise a cow. I think it's comparatively like for every pound of grain, it takes like 10 pounds of I think it was for every pound of grain, it takes like so many gallons of water. But then for every pound of meat or beef, I think it was like 10x that same amount of water. So it's a huge drain in our water as well. So as someone, ESS, I feel like this is also a very compelling argument, just because I feel like we want to leave the world in a better place than we found it. We want future generations to be able to have the same opportunities that we have. So if everyone can't eat a burger every day for the rest of their lives now, but it gives a better chance for the earth to survive and better chance for the environment to be stable enough to which humans can self-thrive, I feel like that's a pretty good trade-off. I think that if we kind of think about the environmental impact of meat, there's a very negative impact for, I'd say, a relatively small amount of pleasure. So personally, as an environmentalist, this is more compelling for me. But then there's also the flip side of, so what if I eat one burger every day? Is that really taking that away? Is that going to be enough of an impact to kind of help prevent climate change, help prevent more natural disasters? Is my individual suffering from not having that enough justification to kind of take it away from everyone? Or is that suffering of me enough for that small change in the climate balance? I would think so if you consider yourself a good person, moral. Your individual, I guess, small comfort is probably not worth the integrity of our ecosystems and planets in the future. So I'd say overall it's a pretty good argument. The next one is the feminist argument. Meat has been a very sexualized industry. When we think of meat, we think of big, strong men, right? And there's often the image or that vegans are kind of weak. They have too much soy. They're not very aggressive in what we would consider other masculine traits that we would associate with eating meat. But I feel like a lot of vegans tend to be healthier in their lifestyles. someone that is more focused on what they put into their body is definitely going to be more healthy than someone that eats fast food every day, has a burger every day. Someone that doesn't really care about what they're eating, just that they are eating. So, but that's also kind of a privileged position that there are people that can't afford to eat the best vegetarian foods, because there is a lot of vegetarian food that is pretty bad for you. It's just filled with preservatives and a lot of GMOs that aren't the best for us. And I also think it's a little weird to say you can't be, or you're less of a feminist if you eat meat compared to someone that doesn't. It just feels a little off to me, because there are women that work in meat industries, and I don't know if it just feels wrong to tell them, oh, you can't be a feminist, or you're less of a feminist than me because you work in that industry or you eat meat. It's just a weird feeling, just very iffy about that. The next argument is the moral consideration of animals. Can you be a moral being if you inflict suffering on another organism or another animal, another sentient being? I feel like this argument has its strengths. Like, everything that exists probably doesn't want to die, it doesn't want to suffer, it wants to be happy and feel joy. So, kind of like forcing these animals in like factory farms and the way we kind of go about producing meat, there's definitely a lot of suffering in those systems. And there's not really a great reason other than we consume a lot of meat, so we need a lot of meat as quickly as possible. So I think the method of which you farm these animals plays a little role, but still not great overall, because you are killing something in the end. You are inflicting suffering. But one thing I could potentially see about this is a sentient being, something that is capable of experiencing life, feeling pain. I don't really know how that would work with someone that's been in a vegetative coma, for example. Like, is their existence less that of an animal? Like, is there, since they are not actively suffering, they are just existing, would they be considered less than an animal? Or like a fetus, for example, it's not fully developed, but it will turn into a person in the future. Is their suffering less that of an animal? So that's a little weakness, I guess, of this argument, but overall, a moral person should feel bad about inflicting suffering upon another living being. If that suffering is enough to kind of sway them out of killing animals, but there's definitely people that say everything kind of suffers, but our suffering matters more than that of a cow. So some people might argue that, but I feel like that's kind of weak. But yeah, overall, a moral person should think about the suffering of an animal and feel off-put by it. That might be enough to stop a lot of people, but there's definitely some people that's not enough. And then I feel like the least strong argument, but maybe the most influential one, or the most appealing one, would be the argument to health. Eating a lot of red meat, not the best for you, especially in the way we kind of farm it. It's not the highest quality of meat usually. So if you're just eating meat all the time, it's not going to be the best for your heart. You can have a lot of a higher chance of heart attack, heart failure, heart disease. That's not a great thing. So maybe the idea of, oh, my personal health could be bettered by eating less meat or no meat at all. And yeah, I'd say most people would like to be healthy. So the idea of like, okay, explaining how eating meat is not the most healthy thing for you, especially in the quantities we are eating in the West. And especially just red meat overall, it's not great for you. But I also feel like it's kind of hard to convince people to give up red meat and meat in general entirely. I feel like most people are okay with eating less meat, but most people enjoy meat a lot. That's why it's such a big industry. So just saying, oh, cutting off meat completely is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, but I feel like over time people would adjust. So this isn't really like a super strong moral argument. This is more like a health argument and kind of getting people to think of themselves a little bit. So overall, I feel like all these arguments together provide a good kind of push for people to stop, think about, is eating meat okay? Is it moral? Because all of these arguments are pushing against that idea. It's saying meat is pretty immoral in a multitude of ways. If it's just because you're using food that could be given to other people to grow animals, or the health impacts of eating too much red meat, and then the idea that animals that we use for meat, cow, sheep, pigs, of that nature, they are alive. They have feelings. They can feel sadness. They can feel scared, and they can suffer. So I feel like all these arguments kind of together provide a good overall push in the right direction, saying, hey, think about this. If you still think it is moral to eat meat after hearing all these, then maybe you aren't the most moral person. All right. Thank you.